This is a story about my friend Silas Weeks, a Quaker, a farmer, and a thinker. He has never stopped thinking, and that is one of the things I admire most about Silas. He often surprises me with a fresh, new way to see things, and he always inspires me with his zest for life.
I don't know how I spotted this building, but one day I went by and spotted it. And I came to quarterly meeting here, and I went in this old building, and I just knew that I had to do something about having this meeting active again. I just absolutely, it hit me, and I was able to do something about it. I got together with Shirley and Eddie Leslie. We wrote to all the Friends institutions for the names of alumni in the area, so forth, and we collected some names and were able to reopen this meeting house.
Silas is a birthright Quaker from Westbury, Long Island, who brought a wealth of Quaker experience to the reopening of the Dover, New Hampshire meeting house some 40 years ago.
When we came here, everything was growing up. So we've opened up a lot of the land, and I think that we had a feeling that we had some obligation. If we had a resource here that could produce something, a barn that was useful, not to use those resources in some way, that we just didn't have the right to let this place go back to woods.
Back in 1974, Silas and his wife Connie found this small farm in Elliott, Maine. They fell in love with it, and ever since, they have been trying to use it in a way that integrates their Quaker beliefs and Silas's professional experience as an extension farm management specialist at the University of New Hampshire.
The Farm Museum and how it got that way. After a long and convoluted career from starting as a supervisor for the Farm and Home Administration with ups and downs and job changes and getting hired and fired and spending some miserable time in the Army, I ended up at the University of New Hampshire as the Extension Farm Management Specialist. And in the course of my work, I was working with a farmer in Kensington on the old York farm, Cleveland Webster, who was converting his business from dairy to poultry. And in the course of that conversion, he called me up and said, gee, I found this wonderful set of wooden gears and stuff, and I hate to see that stuff go to the dump. And I said, gee, Cleve, that's right. And I travel the state for extension, and I see barns going down all over. And all those, and I said, I really worry about those tools post-Civil War that were a combination of iron and wood. The wood is rotting. And if we don't do something about it pretty soon, maybe they'll be gone. And Cleve said, yes, that's right. Let's get together and do something about it. So we called the county agent, Ed Upham. You call the county agent when you want to have a meeting. And he sent a notice out to all the members of the Rockingham County to meet. And we met in Exeter one winter evening, about 30 people, and talked about it. And everybody said, yeah, we ought to do something about saving those things. So in the spring, I guess it was, maybe I kind of forget, maybe 63, the Farm Museum was formed, and the notice got out there was going to be a museum, and we wanted donations of artifacts. Well, the artifacts flowed in from everywhere. We didn't have any money, we couldn't pay for them, didn't want to. At one time, we had stuff stuffed in 22 different barns.
It has become the Farm Museum in Milton, New Hampshire, and it continues to thrive. Recently, they purchased the Plummer Farm next door in order to preserve the integrity of the land and to provide a space for live animal exhibits.
This is pure post and beam construction, and there are 5 vents or sections that went up in. On the inside, you can see what they would do would they would put the floor down, and they'd lay out a bed with all the framing timbers, and then they'd put a gin pole, so you'd have a line over it and down, and a set of oxen, and a bunch of men with pikes, and then they'd raise up one section, and then they'd raise the next section and plug it in. It must have been a great event when it took place, and I can imagine a crowds of people that assembled, and a number of friends, and I assume the women were here getting food prepared and so forth. So it's just a remarkable building. And when you look in the inside, you can see the length and width of this building. There's not a single supporting timber for the second floor on the inside of this building. That's an extremely large open space, considering the time in which it was built. The records seem to indicate this building was used for public events. It's said, and I don't know whether it's correct or not, that the Bill of Rights was read here, for example. He was a most remarkable man, the son of a Lancaster weaver, set out at the age of 18 on his own spiritual journey. When he had this insight about direct revelation without all the trappings, he went about preaching this, as we already said, but he was jailed a number of times under the most horrendous conditions. He spent 3 years in a stone cell with a little straw on it and with a leaky roof, and when he got out, he was so crippled with arthritis he had to be helped on a horse. He had the terrible what it had done to his joints and so forth, and yet he was right there. One time he was in a cell where the jailer would empty chamber pots on top of him from a hole in the cell. He was terribly abused, and his spirit was never broken. Again, a most remarkable man. England was in a state of great ferment at that time. All sorts of social upheaval. The Enclosure Act, the end of the cottage industry, the beginning of industrialization, the Civil War, Protestant Reformation, and there were a lot of unchurched people in England, especially rural. The formal church had neglected them. They resented the high style of the priesthood, and along came this man who preached an entirely different kind of religious philosophy, and it took like wildfire.
Now, this was in the mid-1600s?
This was in the mid-1600s in England.
And what was this message that he gave them? The best you can say. Well,
he had 2 or 3 messages. The first was that by knowing Jesus Christ, it was possible to discern God's will for how you should conduct your life. Secondly, that men and women were not born in sin. Men and women were equal. They were equal in the eyes of God. So this was another revolutionary idea. Thirdly, that salvation had nothing to do with being elected beforehand by God. Up to that time, you didn't know whether you were saved or not. The salvation was dependent on how you lived your life here on earth. And lastly, I guess the one book that everybody had was the Bible. And Fox made it clear that it was the spirit of the word of the Bible and not the word itself, and that any individual was perfectly capable of reading and understanding and using the Bible without interpretation by a priest or a minister. So these were very, very revolutionary ideas.
So the hierarchy was not pleased?
No.
The religious hierarchy?
No, this was a real threat to the church, especially when you started to stop attending, stop paying taxes, and argued that any kind of intervention between you and God was totally not only unneeded, but it was a hindrance. You didn't need an altar, a cross, a hymn, a baptism. Any of these outward symbols were totally unnecessary. George Fox's followers were really committed. Some were called the Valiant 60, and they spread out all over the world. In this country, they went down to Turkey to try and convince the Sultan. They went to Russia to try and convince the Tsar, and they went to Rome to try and convince the Pope. All without any success, I might say.
But great intentions.
But great intentions. And they were severely persecuted. They were a real threat. They were a real threat as the English saw them. They grew rapidly. They're an incredible threat to both the church and the state, and all sorts of repressive laws were put in place. And at one time, as many as 15,000 Quakers were in jail or had their property confiscated, or were beaten or whipped. Well, John Greenleaf Whittier's grandparents were married here in 1802. I think she was a hussy, and his parents were married here. John Greenleaf was known as the Quaker poet. I'm pretty sure his poem about Friends Meeting refers to this meeting house. He attended here frequently. He, of course, has written that poem about when the women were driven from Dover in 1662, which refers to the 3 Quaker ministers who were here at that time. Anne Tompkins, at the moment I don't recall the other 2 women, came to the Dover Neck to publish the truth, as friends say, and got in an argument with a local congregational minister or priest over the Trinity, and according to the myths, anyhow, they defeated Priest Rayner in this argument, much to his embarrassment. And again, as many as the friends used to say, and many were convinced. So they were accused of being heretics, and there was something called the cart law, which was aimed at Quakers. But under the cart law, you were tied to the back of a cart and whipped through town. And these 3 women were tied to the back of this ox cart, and Sheriff Walden, who's greatly honored in a stone behind the church up here, doesn't say anything about the bad things he did, ordered them whipped through Dover, not more than 10 strokes on their bare backs, all the way out of the jurisdiction of the church, which really would have been as far as Rhode Island. They were whipped in Hampton, and when they got to Seabrook, a sympathetic constable ordered them released. They were taken back up here, taken care of by a neighbor of yours over in Kittery, a Major Shapley. They came back again. They were persistent. This time they were dragged. This was in December 22. They were, or in December anyhow, they were dragged across a field of stumps, loaded in a canoe. The canoe upset. They were in the icy water. Somehow or other, they managed to get out. I'm not sure of all the. You get different reports. One report is it was over in the Oyster River that they got out freezing cold. Went into the church in Durham in the middle of a service and talked about the inner light.
By the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down, and there we wept when we remembered Zion.
For the wicked
Carry us away, captivity required from us a song. How can we sing King Alpha's song in a strange land? So let the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord.
One of the most unique features of the Society of Friends, this is decision-making by unity, which is really something different than consensus. So we use the word consensus loosely. the idea is that there's one best way that God would have us resolve an issue if we're patient enough to wait to know what that best way is. And that given time, given prayer, given loving concern for one another, that unity can be found. And the clerk is responsible. The Society of Friends has no hierarchical leadership. The clerk of the meeting at that time is responsible to see that unity is reached, and the clerk is also responsible to not move the issue until unity is achieved. Of course, when Friends were here early days, the men were on this side and the women were on the other side, and the shutters between the two sides would be raised for meeting for worship. Women were always considered equal to men in terms of business affairs and preaching. This division between men and women was ended in 1863, I think. But anyhow, in the old days, the shutters would be lowered for meeting for business, and the women would take care of their business. The men would take care of theirs. Now, today's this would be considered grossly politically incorrect. But you have to remember that for women to be ministers, to preach equally with men, to be able to conduct their own business in the 16th and 17th and 18th, early 1800s was considered absolutely radical. Unheard of that women could do this. So this was really very advanced and not repressive as somebody today would declare. Certainly would be putting women down, so forth, to have them separate.
Now, the women would then come and report to the men's business meeting.
If they had a matter of concern, yes, they'd send a messenger around with one person to accompany her. So I guess not so much for support, but to be sure to indicate that this was the decision of the side, and they'd come around and raise the issue with the men, or present the problem, and to the men's side, and then it would then be taken care of. Quakers in Dover have had a remarkable influence on civil liberties in New Hampshire. The first case was before the General Court in the late 1600s, when a Quaker protested being taxed for support of the church, refused to pay the tax, and the General Court upheld him.
Now, this is support of the state church, right, or the congregational church.
This would have been to have to support the official church of that time, the Puritan church. In a second case, a Quaker was elected to the General Court, refused to take an oath because Quakers don't swear oaths, and his constitutional right to refuse to take an oath was upheld. This was an extremely important decision. And in the third case, a Quaker was essentially a position of a local tax collector, but refused to collect the taxes used for support of the church, and the court again upheld his right as an official to do this because of the earlier decision where the General Court had said that Friends could not be taxed to support the church. It was a long, ongoing discussion in town here between the church and the Friends here to pay for a bell in the church. And off and on, Friends were taxed for the bell and refused to pay, and then they decided to pay. So Quakers have had a great involvement in this town.
You've got to walk, walk, walk. You've got to walk in the light. You've got to stand, stand up for what is right. You've got to pray, pray, pray for the power to see and to walk in the light and be free. You've got to walk, walk, walk. You've got to walk in the light. You've got to stand, stand, stand up for what is right. You've got to pray, pray, pray for the power to see and to walk in the light and be free. Be free to walk in the light and
did that name Quakers come from?
Well, things get lost in time, but the general view is that George Fox was being hauled before a magistrate, and he declared that the magistrate should quake in the presence of the Lord. I was raised in a family where plain language was always used at home, and it seems to me, if we're going to know who we are as Quakers or Friends, that it may be useful in a sense of identity to I suppose, maybe it's a sign of belonging to a club in a way, but it does seem to me that it may be useful to try and keep some of these old habits. We've maintained the old habit here of having a facing bench, for example, and persons on the facing bench to dismiss meeting by shaking hands at the rise of the meeting. We still use some Quakerly terms, like the meeting being settled, or when we talk about meeting next, we say purposing to meet on such and such third month, second day, a year of our Lord. Early friends used numbered the days and the months because they objected to the pagan names, Thursday being after Thor, and so forth. So friends for a long time have used first day, second day, first month, second month, so forth. So that's part of. It seems to me it's not bad to have some customs hang around, even though they may be in some sense dated. We children always called grown-ups not by their first name, but by his cousin. It would be Cousin John or Cousin Jane, until we got to be old enough to call them without the use of the word. And Cousin Grace who was clerk forever, she'd put her minute book on the stand, and we'd have meeting for business right after. Quakers don't have a creed. They have something much more difficult, I think. They have something called queries. This is a series of questions you're supposed to ask yourself on your behavior and to how well you have lived up to these. Do you attend meeting regularly? Do you perform your services to the meeting? Is your household a place of comfort and peace where children are raised properly? Are you prompt in the payment of your debts and the settlement of disputes? Do you these kinds of things? And if you ask yourself these queries every day or even once a week, you might not have too much trouble finding out where you could make some improvement in your life. And there are also queries for the meeting in general, which the meeting is supposed to ask of the body of the meeting. Somehow or other, we're pretty well hidden. We're kind of a secret in terms of whether we exist or not. We don't seem to let people know that we're somehow or other alive and well.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
We opened land across the lane. We planted this orchard when we came. We have 7 gardens here. We opened land across the lane for sheep pasture and cleared that land. You used the wood here. Constance, when we first came, decided that was going to protect all the trees after she saw how pretty soon she had her own chainsaw helping me get rid of the things. Nature hates a vacuum, and everything just fills in, and of course it fills in with a particular progression of shrubs and trees here in New England. So you can look at the vegetation and essentially tell how long the land was used. But this is another good hardwood knoll. Things grow very slowly. There's very minimal soil in there. But
Wow.
you have a good understory of younger hardwoods coming in that will furnish firewood for us someday. The other thing I used to do when I was a little younger here, I have a big long pole saw, and one of the things I loved to do in the fall was wander through the woods where I could find a pine tree that was straight, and I could, for 18 feet, trim off all the branches, so someday there'll be, without the branches you get clear wood.
Yep.
There are no knots. But agriculture has been completely revised. From 30% of the farms feeding the people, we're down to less than 2% of families are now farmers, and it's just appalling. And it's all huge enterprises. 15,000 hogs. They destroyed the small hog farmer. What's his name up here? DaCosta has what, 2,500 or 5,000? 500,000 hens in one place, and the family farm is destroyed, and the rural communities are destroyed, and the infrastructure is gone. We raise a few sheep. We have to go 30 miles to find a slaughterer to do the sheep in. You have to understand it was a totally different kind of agriculture than we have today. It was small farms and lots of small farms, and there was, for all, there may have been some corporate agriculture. I suppose there was maybe the fruit co-op in California and so forth. But the bulk of the products came off small farms, and these farms really hadn't been mechanized by then. They were essentially hand and horse agriculture. I wasn't in New England early enough to have farmers working with oxen, but a number of the farmers I worked with were still using horses, and the farms I worked on in the summertime used horses, and the hay was loaded by hand, and there were no balers hadn't come along, field forest harvesters and choppers hadn't come along. People made corn silage, but it was the old-fashioned way with bringing the corn in and putting it through a blower and up in the silo. Up until almost the Civil War, every single drop of hay, every single bit of grain that was harvested and eaten was harvested with a hand sickle, and later with this scythe, and threshed with this flail. And that's the way it was. And if you can imagine feeding 40 million people and Lord knows how many horses, with doing all this work with these three tools, and these two, the sickle and the flail, are as old as the Bible. They're biblical tools. This scythe came later, and after a bit there was a cradle added on the back to try to kind of put grain in sheaves. But every single bit of all the feed that occurred came with people on their hands and knees and this sickle, and then threshing on the barn floor like that, beating the grain out of the chaff, and then picked up and tossed up in the wind to blow the chaff out.
Yep.
And
all by hand.
All by hand. And we talk about putting welfare people back to work who have no training and no skills. There are no unskilled jobs left for all practical purposes. Everything was done by hand. I was looking at a video of an aqueduct that was built to give water to Los Angeles. It took 6,000 men to make that aqueduct because there were no bulldozers, no backhoes, none of these things. Everything was hand labor. When I grew up, everything was mostly still hand labor. I sat on my suburban street and saw a cellar dug with a pair of horses and a scoop and people with a shovel. There were railroad crossing guards, set of lights, there were people but the gates up and down. There were an enormous amount of unskilled jobs. They weren't very well paid, but there was always, and if you didn't have a job, they'd farm you out to some farmer where you might work for your room and board. Well, wasn't very comfortable. A lot of things wrong, but there were thousands of unskilled jobs, and they just don't exist anymore.
The Lord is my shepherd, I have restores my soul. She rights my wrongs. She leads me in a path of good things and fills my heart with songs.
I was born in 1914, just at the beginning of the end of a place called Community. And a place called Community had a couple of special features that are gone forever. One was accountability. If you were a member of a place called Community, you had accountability to that community, and with that went civility. I say it was a non-intentional community because you didn't have choices with whom you would associate or with whom you would do business. You couldn't escape, and the automobile destroyed all that. Today, I don't know who most of my neighbors are. I do business in Dover. I go to church in Dover. I socialize in Kittery. I do my shopping and business in Portsmouth. I don't do nothing in this community. Growing up, we had no escape. A neighbor ran the grocery store, and a neighbor ran when we began to have a garage, and a neighbor was your insurance agent, and a neighbor was your lumberman. And we talk about a service community. That was a service community. The grocer picked out your groceries when you went to the grocery store. The doctor came to your house. The telephone operator got your number. You called up and said, I want to speak to Rhineland 9000, and the operator plugged you in. The milkman brought milk to you every day. The iceman came by once or twice a week to bring a block of ice to go in the ice box, not the refrigerator. The coal man came with a sack of coal and dumped it in the cellar. There were no automatic furnaces. You stoked the furnace by yourself and carried out the ashes out the other side if you're fortunate enough to have a furnace. When I was small, we still had a cook stove in the kitchen. In the summertime, you cooked when it was hot. That's the way it was. You were responsible to your neighbors because everybody knew everybody and everybody knew what went on. And if you misbehaved, your parents knew it within the next 24 hours. It's hard for me to think about 24-hour shopping. And in the old days, you worked 6 days a week. And when I went to UNH, everybody worked 5.5. You worked 10 hours a day till the New Deal cut it back to 8 hours. And you shopped when you could, which was Saturday night. Mm-hmm. And you didn't have much time for. And holidays were holidays. Oh, we didn't have a thing called mishmash called President's Day. We had George Washington's Day. In school, we made little hatchets, and we talked about the father of our country. Oh, couldn't tell a lie. He did cut the cherry tree down. We had heroes. And when it was George Washington's birthday, it was on the 22nd, not some other date, and everything was shut down. And Sundays were shut down, and Sundays were quiet. Sundays were a day of rest. They weren't shopping days, and they weren't entertainment days. And people were glad to have a day of rest. And the other thing that's changed for me, people got dressed up. And it's hard for me to have a life where nobody ever gets dressed up anymore. It was one of the small pleasures to put on special clothes and go somewhere and do something. Yeah. So much changes for me, and much I have. It's difficult for me.
Yeah. Yep. And that's why you feel like an alien.
That's why I'm. What was Toffler's book? Cultural shock.
Yes.
I suffer cultural shock in my own culture. Yeah. So because of the enormous amount of change, and of course incredible technical change. Yeah. Unbelievable. I sat in my barn, and when I had a house in Durham one day with a television out in the barn, and watched a man walk on the moon. Mm. And that from my father, probably when I was born, probably still had a horse in the barn out back to go to work. At least he commuted by the train. Yep. And so I think anybody born after World War II doesn't understand or know the world I lived in, and there's no way you could. You can't expect people to have a feeling about something they never experienced. These are all good ones, and these are all you know, pre and post Civil War.
Yep. Oh, I see you have yours in here.
Oh yes, yes. I decided I'd like to be prepared, so I read in a Yankee magazine about a man who still made by hand 18th and 19th century stones, and he has made this for us with a farm logo on the top, and there it stands.
Silas Burling. Where'd that come from, that name, Burling?
Family name for me. You see, it's proper Quaker with the 11th month first.
Right.
We have a family plot, this burying ground in Westbury, Long Island, and my father and mother, my sister, my first wife are there, but I just don't. This is my home. I really don't feel that I want to be. In a sense, you know, I suppose I'd like to be next to my ancestors, my aunts and my uncles, my grandparents. But I'm some sort of a 19th century man or 18th century man, and that stone and this burying place seem to be right for me. And I'm not a Yankee born, but I guess I feel I'm a Yankee by temperament, and this is somehow or other where I belong, and that's an awful piece of vanity for me to have had a stone made like that. Costs a lot of money for an old Quaker, but I still like it.
And that's right, then.
So that's, you know, that's just the way it is, as they say.
All right.
The other thing I ought to make clear is that we have put a conservation easement on this property. We own 38 acres here. We've had it surveyed. This farm may not be developed. May not have any. It can have one more house if a family member wants to build it, but that's all. And it can't be exploited for gravel mining or sod mining. It has to stay in agriculture, forestry use, or a small home business. You know, if you were an artist or insurance agent or something like that, that would be fine. But that's it for this property. Mm-hmm. And that's held in perpetuity by the Great Works Regional Land Trust, of which Constance is a board member, and I've been a board member. I don't go to meetings anymore because I can't hear anything.
Surely, surely goodness and kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will live in her house forever, forever and ever.
Here we have in the barn down there 20,000 different farm artifacts, many of them just slightly different, showing progression of their development over time. We also have the kinds of things that represent a way of life that's no longer with us. For example, down the corner of the barn are 700 or 800 milk bottles from different small dairies that once existed in New Hampshire, producer-dealer dairies, and every single one of those is gone, and that was a particular way of life. I don't think we can understand really who we are unless we know who we were. I often think of Steinbeck's note in his novel The Okies, where they were packing up to leave for California in the old Ford, and they couldn't get all the stuff in, and one of the women said, without our possessions, how will we know who we were and who we are? And without these kinds of possessions, I don't think we can begin to understand where we come from, and more importantly, how we got that way, and to understand how our forebears built this country, mostly with their hands, And it really wasn't until it wasn't until 1820 they began to have any kind of tools other than the crudest one-of-a-kind made one at a time for special use, heavy, not very effective. Everything was done by hand. Everybody worked hard all the time, from sunup to sundown. There was no entertainment. There was no television, radio. There was no noise. Imagine a world without any noise in it, except maybe the blacksmith shop hammering away. One of the wonderful things we have here are more than one of a kind various pieces of equipment, so you can see the progression of their development. And this is a whole series of plows that have gradually changed in their not their function, but the way they function. Here's one with a wooden beam, for example. You go on down and you find they have iron beams. And up there we have Daniel Webster's originally big old enormous wooden plow with a wooden moldboard and some iron on it. And it must have taken 4 or 5 oxen to have pulled the darn thing. And I think it must have taken 4 or 5 men to have held it in the ground. But this is one of the wonderful things. There are 20,000 artifacts in this barn alone. And one of the wonderful things is you can see the progression and the development of the tools as they improved over time, from hand to mechanized. And we're very proud, and there's no collection I know anywhere it's like this. I've been to the Smithsonian. They have some nice exhibits, a few of this and a few of that, but nothing compared to here. Unfortunately, we seem to be an awfully well-kept secret. We need more people to know more about what we have here and help us support things. It's just an unbelievable, unique, one-of-a-kind, in many cases, things that a farmer had to invent himself, or he went down to the blacksmith to have it made to do a special job. Yeah. I have a left-handed sickle at home. Some farmer couldn't. He cut with his right hand. He had to go down, have the blacksmith make him one to cut with his left hand. So lots of things like that in this barn. Now, this is a threshing machine, and it was an enormous improvement and advance of what we were talking about before, threshing grain with a flail on the barn floor. This was attached. This was powered by an old-fashioned one-lung gasoline engine, or maybe the old Ford. You throw the grain in one end, still on the stalk, and a great fan in here, and a bunch of grates and shakers and so forth. Huge amount of noise. Out one side comes the grain, clean, and you bag it in a bag, and out the rear end comes an enormous flow of dirt, dust, chaff, and straw, and you're dirty from head to foot all over the thing, especially if the wind is blowing in the wrong direction. It's hard. It's not such hard work, but it's really dirty work. Somebody stands on a wagon with a fork, throws the grain in that end, goes through this process, comes out separated. This is a drive-through barn. A team of horses and the hay would come in here, and they'd be unloaded directly into the mow over the livestock and on the other side. And in this barn, I'm not sure, but in many barns, you would have used these grapples up here, a grapple of some form to go down and grapple with the hay, pull it up, run it along a track, and drop it while the people who were mowing hay would put it away. That didn't happen in this barn, I think, because it was so easy to take it off the wagon. You just drive through and down the ramp on the rear and come around again. This is a bog shoe. When hay was made out on the salt marsh hay, it was terribly soft, and the horses' hoofs would have sunk right in. So you put these bog shoes on their feet to keep them from sinking down in the muck. They stack the hay, and they put some caps on it. We have some caps up the other end of the barn that look. Everybody wonder if there's some sort of a gigantic mushroom. And John York, who's been one of the great supporters of this museum, we have a tape of John talking about making salt marsh hay that he did with his father and grandfather. A lot of good things have happened to me in my life, including the privilege of being at UNH, but this was one of the nicest things that ever happened to me. My family, for my 80th birthday, established a fund here up at the Farm Museum that'll go on and on and on, and the use of the funds to acquire and rehabilitate artifacts. I can't think of a nicer thing, really, that happened to me in my whole life, although many nice things happen. I most really appreciate what my family did, and every member of them joined in on that.
Surely, surely goodness and kindness will follow me all the days of my life.
Shirley and Eddie Leslie and Lydia Frink and I are the remaining people who opened this meeting. Everybody else is gone. The list is quite long and difficult for me to think about because there are a lot of old-time friends. So things have changed a lot.